Okay, we are on Freedom 2, and we're going to look at the diesel engine, which is, we have to remove the stairs. Get them out of the way here. And so this is a universal two-cylinder 5411 diesel engine, which is the original engine for this boat, and this was an 82, so this engine is 40 years old, and it's showing it. So we're going to start looking at the cooling system first, and to get to the through hole, you have to look at the port side back here, and I'll let the camera get in, and you'll see a through hole with the key on it, and I'm going to go ahead and open that. Put the key aside. The water line then comes up here to the water pump, and this looks similar to other water pumps. Same make, slightly different model, but to access the impellers you would take this cap off with 4 screws. That would let you take a look at the impeller. Right next to it is a strainer, and this is a mini strainer. It's above the water line, so we can open it, and you can see I'll dump the water out. There's nothing in there. The fact that on the bottom of the boat, the intake for the raw water has a type of strainer on it already, so I've never seen anything get caught up in that strainer. That water line then goes down here and goes into the engine. It then comes out here, and there's a little connector, and it goes back into the engine, and then to a thermostat that when the engine heats up will open. But when the engine is cool, the water actually comes back on the hose out of the bottom of that fitting, and comes back and tees into the original intake. So how this works is when the engine is just warming up and not hot, the water recirculates. And again, what's interesting about this is this old design. It's salt water that's cooling the engine. All the larger boats have the more modern freshwater system for the actual cooling of the engine. When it does heat up, that thermostat opens, and you see a hose going off to the back. And if you wanted to get into the view from the starboard quarter berth, there's an access point into the back of the engine. You'll see that hose goes over and injects the water into the exhaust, and then that goes out the back. So on this boat, when you first turn on the engine, water does not come out the back because it's only after it warms up. So that is completely different from all of the other medium and large boats with diesel engines. If you look at the back of the engine, you'll see the transmission. Typically, there's nothing needed to be done with that. The boat chiefs would check that transmission fluid on work days, but it's nice to know it's back there. If the control cable were to break, you could have somebody reach in and shift the transmission manually, but that's a little more awkward on this boat than some of the other bigger boats, because you'd have to actually reach back into there from the this quarter berth. But it would be possible. Adjusting the throttle would be, if that cable were to break, would be a lot easier because that is up right here by the front of the engine. One issue with this engine right now is if we look at the front of the engine, you can see that there's a little bit of oil pooling. This engine does have a bit of an oil leak that has been patched a couple times. If we look down at the absorber, it's totally black because oil's been leaking. So that really has to be watched. And of course, we're going to check the oil level. Got my handy dandy paper towel here. And on this particular engine, it's very important to take it out, wipe it down, because this dipstick doesn't actually go into the crankcase. It's on the side, so to get an accurate measurement, you want to clean it, put it back in, and we can see that it's nice and full. So this is one you really have to watch if you're going to be motoring a lot because it does leak. Now, if you want to add oil, that's another adventure. Because to access the oil, I'm going to put my finger on it right here. Someplace back here is where you, right here, my finger's on it. This is where you take this off and add oil. And you can see there's not a lot of room in here, so it's a little tricky. That funnel definitely helps. The fuel tank is actually right under here. It can be accessed through this panel. There you can see the hose, there's a shut-off valve. If you ever had a leak, you could shut that off. And then that fuel line comes in into a Racor where we can look at the fuel in the bottom and see that it's nice and pink. There's no other residue in there, any water, which would come out looking milky. That could be drained, but that has to be done carefully. It then goes down here to the mechanical pump, which unlike some of the Yanmars, there's no manual actuation of that. It then comes back to the fine filter, and then it comes under the air intake, and then that goes to the high pressure pump, which is right here, and then we have the metal lines going up to the injectors. We also have, this is a 2-cylinder, we have 2 glow plugs, and you can see the power for those. Since this engine is old, it definitely likes that having the glow plug run for at least 20 seconds to warm it up, to kind of get a good hot fuel to start it up, since there's, I'm sure, a little degradation in the compression of this old baby. Okay, we're going to talk about a little more about plumbing. This does have a freshwater tank, and it is right here. This tank, which can be filled from the deck, has just one purpose, and that is to pump water over to the sink. There's no electric pump on this, but there's a foot pump, and when you step on that, it pumps water into the small little sink here. But as you can notice, the water's not going out because we have to open a valve. And that valve is right under here. Okay, and it drains. Now we notice that there's a small ice box right behind that actually has a custom liner and has some pots and pans in it. But that custom liner, you could put ice in there, but to get that to drain, you then have to come back down, and in this case you're going to want to look up and see that there's another T right here with a valve, and that valve drains the icebox. So two separate drains go into this through hole, one for the sink, one for the icebox. Okay, as long as we're here, we'll point out this is the depth sounder, so that goes up to the instrumentation, and right behind here is the DC electrical, so you have a standard Perco where you can be on one, both batteries, or two, and there are two separate batteries. We'll go ahead and leave it on for now. You then have the switches for the running lights, cabin lights, steaming, anchor light, and spreader light, and then there's a separate switch for the macerator, and we'll talk about the macerator in just a minute. But we're going to go ahead and close this through hole since we're done with that. Okay, so this is Freedom 2's head, and there's a small cubby hole with the through hole. That's the near through hole. That is for the raw water that goes to the head. Now, this does not have a direct discharge option, but when you use this, it goes directly into a holding tank, which is up in under the forward berth. Okay, and then there is another through hole a little further back that has a macerator attached to it. The one unique thing about this boat is it has two valves, one above the macerator, one below it. And so you have to open both of those valves before you use the macerator. So that's a little unique for this boat. Most just have a through hole valve. So, and then we previously looked at the electrical switch for the macerator. Again, you want to be offshore before you open that valve and use the macerator. You have to be 3 miles off along the mainland and 6 miles off the islands, which are marine sanctuary. We're in the cockpit now in this small lazarette on the aft starboard side. We have the controls for the throttle and the transmission. These other lines in the little Tupperware are for the spinnaker. So it does have actually two spinnakers. Okay, I'm going to close this. Inserting the throttle and the shift mechanism. If we now look in this spacious lazarette, first of all, if we look down below, you can see there are the two batteries, battery 1, battery 2. There's also a battery test point and a fire extinguisher. What's important to understand is the throttle mechanism. I'm going to be turning the throttle a little bit, and you can see this cam type mechanism. When it's in this position, there's actually a little detent right here. When it's in the up position, the throttle is totally closed. That's how you actually turn off the engine. There's no separate shut off. And if you look at where the handle is, it's towards the aft and not quite horizontal. To put it for the start position, we will rotate it about this far, and if we look at our mechanism, you can see the cable has now been pushed forward, and I'll do that again, going from the off to the start position. And that's then the throttle cable which attaches to the engine, which we saw earlier. Okay, so then the shift is a separate mechanism. I'm in reverse, neutral, forward, and so you can see how that mechanism works. Okay, so a little different from all the other boats. This is just the old style, old school Catalina. We're going to start the engine just for chuckles, and we have our panel here. Put the key in. Turning on the blower, and it is blowing. You can just put your hand back here, and it is taking air out of the engine compartment, which is actually quite a large engine compartment. We'll give it a minute here. Okay, so the key is on in the run position. We'll switch it to the glow plug. But one thing you'll notice or hear is there's no oil pressure alarm. And that is because it has been disconnected, because it was the alarm was running all the time. And we never quite sorted that out. So with this, we're going to start the engine. We're going to put it to the glow position, which is labeled there nicely. Then we'll give it about a 20-second count and then push the starter button. So I'm going to just wait here and be patient. Okay. And it started right up. So on this boat, about 20 seconds on the glow, whereas on all the newer boats, you only do it about 10 seconds. And it's coming right out the back. And there's no water coming out to speak of, I assume, because it will not start flowing until the engine's warmed up. So one thing that's important on this engine is to monitor the engine temperature, which is, so this is the engine temperature, this is the fuel gauge, this is the charging, the amps, and then the hour meter. The one to watch when you're motoring is this temperature gauge. And basically, it's sometimes hard to read, but if the gauge is left of vertical, the engine's happy. If the gauge is right of vertical, it's running hot. So very important to monitor the temperature on this engine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this off now, and so you'll see I'm turning it down until it goes to that detent and it shuts off. Okay, we have a stern lazarette, which has a stern anchor, complete with chain and rod, some oil transmission fluid, Baylor sponge, some fuel treatment, and that's something we didn't talk about earlier, but if you fill up with diesel, you definitely want to use the fuel conditioner. Basically, if there's any moisture in the diesel tank, bugs will grow between the water diesel interface, and if you get enough of those, it clogs up the filters. So we always add this bug juice or fuel conditioner to kill the little buggers in the diesel tank. So with this conditioner, if you turn this up, you get a certain measure in this compartment. You want about 1 ounce going in. I think it's per 40 gallons, but it's better to err on the side of a little too much than not enough. You can also measure the ounces here. So whichever way you want to open this one or this one to put it into the fuel tank. And it's actually quite important, this is where the diesel goes, to put the conditioner in before you add the diesel, because it's a long hose going down there, and if you put the conditioner in after you've added the diesel, it may never get to the tank. So add the conditioner, then add the diesel. And about 1 ounce is good for our tank. We also have a bilge pump, and this is a manual one. I'm actuating it. I can actually hear it pumping water. It's in line with the regular pump, so it's now pumping, and it actually works quite well. Okay, so we are back down below, and we're looking at the bilge, which is in need of cleaning, but we see a float switch. You want to lift that up, and we can now hear the pump, and it is pumping, which is interesting because we just pumped from the emergency pump, but there's still some water in there. So that's the pump. Also down here is the knot meter impeller, which on this boat, interestingly, goes out the side of the keel rather than out the bottom. And so as that is definitely below the water line, when you take that out to clean it or repair it, you need to put the plug in or the boat will sink. So, and that, I can tell you, needs to be done quickly because the water will come flowing in once you take that out. So if the knot meter is not working, it's a good chance that it's gotten some crud on it, and it can usually be cleaned, unless it's been damaged, in which case the actual impeller needs to be replaced. Okay, this boat does have shore power, and we're looking at the breaker that's labeled as AC main. And the AC goes to just 2 points on this boat. One is right here on the port side, and we have the fan plugged into it, but also this larger cable is for the battery charger. So it's important that that be left on. And so that's an important feature. And there's a similar outlet on the other side, right here. And it does have a ground interrupt button, so if the shore power weren't coming on, you could always check that. So just those 2 points, and not a complicated AC system like some of the bigger boats. Okay, so putting the boat away, we have to close the raw water through hole, and then put the keys back on. And we've already turned off the DC power, the Perco, so we are all set. Okay, so we're looking at the shore power plug. Unfortunately, when the boat's tied up on the port side at the dock, it's easy to step on the shore power connector. So just be careful, because it's a little bit of a headache to replace that connector. Okay, so we're finishing up all the systems on Freedom 2. We will come back at some point and go over the electronics. We'll kind of do that separately. And then maybe even have a spinnaker class on this boat, as it does have set up nicely for racing with a light and heavy spinnaker. So hope you enjoy this video, and definitely watch it before your first training. Thanks.